Good evening, everyone. It is February 17, 2013. I am Rene Ritchie, and tonight we are talking about the future of OS X and iOS. We are talking about the future of the Apple TV, and we are talking about the future of the Mac Pro. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the founder of MacRumors. He also has some other websites you might have heard of, App Shopper and Touch Arcade. It is Mr. Arnold Kim. How are you, Arn?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Are you getting a lag when I talk to you?
Oh, sorry. Well, you kind of cut out that last time, so I wasn't sure if you said something else, but it sounds okay right now.
Okay, perfect. So I gave you a list of things to talk about, but I just saw Mark Gurman tweet out that it's been exactly a year since Mountain Lion was announced.
Yeah.
And
we've talk about that?
Yeah, we've seen server logs for 10.9. I mean, I never know when it's kids playing around, because I've got server logs showing 11.7 as well.
Yeah. I mean, everyone always gets all angry about it and says, well, this could be fake, which they can be, but there's a consistency to it. And there's sort of a progression, 1 or 2 could be a fake, but there's sort of this growth in usage over the last, and it's not huge usage, but it's usage. And, I think it's happening, whether or not that means, hopefully we'll hear about it soon. I mean, Apple's got to do something for the first half of the year, right? I mean, everything else seems to be pushed off to Q3.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was no event last year. They just had a bunch of the usual journos up to New York or up to Cupertino.
Yeah, it was a very
demos.
Right. It was a very unusual event, actually, in that they did these private screenings ahead of time, and then they just sort of unembargoed it that one day, and then it just happened. And so they announced the actual, they announced it, and then they also oh, look, here are all these press, hands-on with it. So it was a very unusual it was very unusual for Apple to do something like that. So, maybe they'll do it. I guess we could
wake up in the morning and see Jim with a Heineken copy of what would it be this year? Purple leopard? I don't know, purple tiger?
Right. Lynx, I guess. Or
I'm still hoping for Sabertooth because it's even bigger.
But yeah, but Apple had said that they're going to do these sort of more frequent, less massive updates. So it's going to happen this year. And like I said, from a timing perspective, it seems like March, April is going to be light. At least it doesn't sound like there's going to be the people. I guess the iPad event or anything that people have been expecting the past few years. Or I guess they also can talk about iOS 7. So maybe that'll happen at some point in the next couple of months.
Yeah, it's all one guy now.
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Right.
And it's interesting because early on in the iOS days, they took people off of macOS to work on iOS, and then, what was it, Leopard, that ended up getting delayed, and now it's one guy again managing everything. So I don't know how much can that man do in one day?
Right. Well, presumably he's not coding all of the next iOS 10, but I guess the teams, Apple's always been sort of moving the best people around, which is why. So I've heard, so what people say is that's why, certain apps don't get updated because the guy who wrote that app, let's say the podcast app, is busy doing something else now, so he's not updating that app. Yeah. Which seems absurd, I think they can find someone to update their mobile apps. It doesn't have to be best of breed, right?
Well, that was the story over the weekend that people were complaining about the podcast app and saying that Apple is not resource constrained. And in terms of engineers, they are. Like you said, that the remote app wasn't updated for a long time because that guy was busy.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. It's which is understandable in that. Apple likes, I guess, to have the best people for whatever, and they like moving the best people from place to place, or that's the story, or so it's told. But come on, the remote app, right? Do you need the best iOS programmer to be working on the remote app? At any given time, I think you can hire someone to work on the remote app, right?
And Apple does farm out. It's a barely kept secret that there are occasions when Apple apps are made by people who no longer work at Apple or who work at special companies. So
yeah, well, they need to do more of that, right? Based on the sort of speed it updates. Podcast apps I brought up because I saw the headlines this weekend. People were complaining that it still basically sucks from its launch. So yeah.
Yeah, and iOS 7. I mean, that's the interesting thing, because that used to be in the spring, and then they moved that to WWDC, and now there is this big hole in the spring with everything already being updated, and software is pretty much the only thing left.
Right. Well, no, that's why this is like the big gap, and maybe OS 10.9 will be part of that, or maybe they'll somehow combine it with iOS 7. And the other thing people are sort of interested in this year is the whole, forestall departure. Yeah. So now I guess Ive is a front-facing guy for iOS development, which I don't know, I think we talked about this before when we were at Macworld, but I mean, everyone's excited about that because, I guess for whatever reason, Forstall had a pretty bad. People, there was some bad stories that him not being a team player and that sort of thing, and people also blamed him for some of the design choices, in iOS 6, and there's a lot of hope in Ive taking over, because it's like, well, he'll finally do whatever people want him to do to make iOS better.
Yeah, they took all their pain and all their anger and lumped it on the top of a theme in Game Center and in Find My Friends.
Right. The whole design, and I mean, I don't know. Like I said, at least Ive has like a very strong opinion about design. So I think, and I think that's good, because I think we talked about this. I think Tim Cook. I think Tim Cook's doing a great job overall. I feel like he he's sort of part of, he's been part of the company. He's not like an outsider that suddenly took over when Steve Jobs passed away. But my only, what I don't know about Tim Cook is I can't tell if he has strong opinions about design or about products.
He does talk about them. I mean, in the video interviews and when he's in the conference room, he talks about how beautiful the staircases are in the Apple stores and how the tiles they picked for the Spanish store and the finish on the edge of the Mac Mac Pro.
No, and that's great to hear. But did he pick the tiles? Is he the one that's
is he in the quarry?
This tile is a shade wrong. We need this tile. Stop everything. He doesn't. I mean,
make it
I don't
whiter.
know. Maybe he is that, but I kind of doubt it. And at least with Ive, I feel like he kind of has that. That's sort of maybe he's not going to be right, but at least he has an opinion. He has a very clear opinion and probably vision on those sort of things.
Steve Strezza is wondering if it's too early for an Ive influence on iOS 7, because they've likely been working on it for a while. And yeah, my understanding is they've been working on 7 since long before 6 launched.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance that it'll be too soon. It's like when, the month after Jobs passed away and Apple released something, they're like, oh, this is post-Jobs, but it really wasn't.
Steve Jobs would never.
And even now, we're still on the tail end of, stuff Jobs was a part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so iOS 7 won't, I think a lot of people are going to be maybe hoping for something more dramatic, and I don't know if it's going to happen.
At least not with 7, but they are working on 8 already too, so their path is well set.
Yeah.
And as Tim Cook, actually, to exactly the point you're making, Tim Cook was at Goldman Sachs this week, and one of the things he said is that he thinks Johnny Ive has the best taste in the business, and he's really excited about Ive bringing that talent and that design aesthetic to software as well.
Right. He said that specifically, which we knew, I guess, but it's kind of, people got excited about that. Ive, software, and they're so happy. They're we'll see if people might be putting too much hope into that. But it's not just a design though. I mean, I don't know. There's, if you read the criticisms of Apple and iOS these days, a lot of it's beyond just the veneer. It's also the functionality, the features, and a lot of it is people complaining that Apple still keeps too tight a control over functions. You can't customize which maps you use per se.
No default apps.
Browser, right, and those sort of things. And I don't know if that'll change with I don't know if what's going to happen with that.
See, that's what I'm interested in, because we're in the, I don't know what the right word is. We're in the counter-programming phase, because Apple releases a phone, and then 6 months later, all the new Android phones comes out. Whether it's the Nexus 4, it'll be the Galaxy for the Galaxy S4 soon. It'll be the HTC One, and they're all going to have, whatever the latest generation specs are: 1080p displays, wireless charging, NFC. They'll just have any feature that you can cram into a slab will be in these phones, and Apple won't really have much to say until maybe 6 months from now with a 5S, and that's always when you hear that Apple's falling behind memes start picking up speed.
Right. Because Apple's competing with like all these, half a dozen or more than that, like dozens and dozens of phones that come out all the time. The other problem with, I guess, Apple has seen is that I think initially when Android first came out, there was a pretty valid argument to say, well, it's not any good, right? You compare it to iOS, Android, it's a piece of whatever.
It was janky.
But there's the good enough state that whether or some people are going to argue that Android is equal to, if not better than iOS, but certainly there's very few people I think now that'll say, well, Android is like way behind. I think the way behind aspect of it is gone. So now it's a question of what's going to compel. Is the delta big enough between Apple and iOS, or between iOS and Android for and obviously for a lot of people it's not, and so Android's doing pretty well.
Yeah, and there's originally Apple had such mindshare that everything was going to be an iPhone killer, that everything was compared to the iPhone. It was part of every conversation. But Samsung is basically Android now in terms of market share, definitely in terms of profit share. And people are they're spending so much money on marketing. Their marketing budget dwarfs almost everyone else in the space, that you could make an argument that Samsung is accruing a lot of mindshare now, and people are looking more at the Galaxy S phones and saying, well, Apple's falling behind. These have XYZ feature. These have giant screens. These have, they can do bump and they can do all these neat things I see in the commercials. Where's Apple's answer to that?
Yeah, and there's two aspects to that sort of line. One is like that Samsung is becoming Android effectively, at least in terms of market share, and I guess that may or may not make Google nervous depending on what their goals are with Android. But then that brings up then you're talking about like screen sizes and stuff for Android versus Samsung phones versus Apple phones, and then we get into the rumors of like the 5-inch iPhone, which I think you've covered pretty extensively. And I think, I don't know, it'll be interesting. I see an argument for it. I see how it could happen. And, Apple's not necessarily been opposed. They are expanding their product line. There's the iPad mini. I think a year ago, people were saying, Apple's not going to do that. They said it was a 10-inch iPad, period. They're not going to introduce a 7-inch iPad or whatever. But I think the same argument can be made for the 5-inch iPhone, which I do firmly believe. Everyone's seen the rumors for the 5-inch iPhone, and I think when they first started trickling out earlier, maybe late last year or even early this year, people were kind of like, "Oh, it's not going to happen." But we've seen enough talk about it that I feel confident they're prototyping it. It's definitely, I guess once you start getting leaks from, I guess, Chinese manufacturers, and we're talking like more advanced, obviously in Cupertino's labs somewhere, I'm sure there's
a triangular iPhone.
Right. There's an iPhone for everything. But once you start doing like production runs and trying, and once the information starts coming out through China, then they're actually like at least taking, it's made the initial cut, and now they're like actually going to, see how it turns out or whatever. And that doesn't necessarily mean it'll actually launch, but I think it's definitely happening, at least to that degree, and then whether or not it comes out or not is a whole nother question, which probably won't even be decided. It'll probably be Tim Cook and or his executives deciding it. Saying, well, now we're going to do this.
Yeah, it's weird.
But
because
I see it. I could see it. I don't dismiss it as like ridiculous.
My fear, what I hope doesn't happen, is because we're getting these large screen Android devices, because they have NFC, wireless charging, espresso makers, whatever they can literally put into these phones. Apple's always been very purpose built. They've been very minimalist. They've put the minimum feature set they need to accomplish the goals that they have for that device. But their competition is increasing. It's getting tougher. People are making other phones are becoming popular. And a lot of the wish lists that I see for iOS 7, and a lot of sites have published them now, to me, they're all catch-up wish lists. They're like, they want default apps. They want to be able to do this feature that an Android phone has. And to me, if Apple puts out a catch-up device, either in spec or in iOS 7, that's almost a sign that something has gone wrong. I still want Apple to be that visionary, leading, single-purpose focus company.
Right. And I agree with that. And, you know, it's hard. I think we live in a very, I mean, you and I, like, and the people who watch, you know, iMore podcasts, people who read iMore, people who read MacRumors, these are the people, or people who read them and like comment and like actually like read these opinion pieces. I mean, these are definitely out of the mainstream, you know, audience. And I guess I don't know what the answer is, and maybe Apple does or doesn't, but you know, what does the average consumer care about when they go to go to a store and decide between Android and iOS? And I honestly, I feel too out of touch with that environment to say for sure. You know, do they care about default apps? I mean, to some degree, probably. I mean, you know, I want better maps. I don't want Apple's maps, for example. That probably
I want Google Maps to be my default. I want Chrome to be my default.
Right, and that did hit a pretty mainstream news cycle with the Apple Maps issue. But a lot of the other customization stuff, I don't know if is so mainstream and, you know, is necessarily a defining factor. I mean, I do think that, like, for example, a cheaper phone probably is a factor, you know, like in a lot, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if people's decision points between an Android phone and an Apple phone would be, you know, price driven. And I don't know where do the Samsung phones fall in terms of price?
They have every inch of screen size and every dollar of, I mean, Samsung has been much bolder at addressing emerging markets. Maybe not as much as the Chinese phones, but they have a wider range. They have the Galaxy S Mini, Galaxy S3 Mini now. That's smaller size and
right, and maybe that may be a factor more than anything. In that, you know, I think back when Apple did the whole iPod line, there was talk about, you know, not, and I think they even referenced it when they went into the iPhone line. There's like they want to make sure that there's no price umbrella where that they're missing. So you don't want competitors to be able to undercut you. You know, you don't want someone. They, like, for example, the iPod Shuffle came in at $49 or $59, and you know, they captured that market for the people who just want a non-screened, you know, MP3 player, rather than let, like, you know, the Samsungs like sort of approach that market. And, you know, if that's where a lot of the dollar sales are, then I think the arguments for the low cost iPhone also sort of creep in. And again, we talked about this at Macworld too, where and I do think that there's room for that.
But the danger is, like, and I think this is exactly what we discussed, is the average sales price of the iPhone fell because the iPhone 4 is a really good phone and it's available for $0. And this year, presumably the iPhone 5 goes to $100. Next year, the iPhone 5, again, if they keep to pattern, becomes a $0 phone. And then these phones aren't cheap to make. They're using they're not using cheap technology, yet they're going to presumably be sold at a cheap price. And it might make financial sense at some point to have an actual cheaper bill of goods on an iPhone. And it might also take pressure off the premium model if, you know, the iPhone 5 isn't what it's competing with.
Right. I mean, these, you know, if the iPhone 5 becomes like the free model, I mean, that, you know, I mean, we have iPhone 5s. The build quality is amazing, right? So, you know, suddenly that becoming like the free phone seems a little out of line. And, you know, I mean, and the Delta, you know, I think back when the 3GS was the free phone, that it sort of made some sense. Well, you get a 3GS for free, or you pay $200 and get the iPhone 4, which is so much better. But now between the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 4S is like, you know, it's hard. I remember, you know, you get Siri, I guess. Yep. It's a little faster. So that's about it. And then from the 4 to the 5, it's still not that great. And obviously, based on their sales numbers, they ran out of iPhone 4s last quarter. So that Delta is not big enough for people to, like, you know, make the $200 jump.
Yeah, and if you go into a store and every phone, so they have two problems. You go into a carrier store, an Apple store they can control a lot, but you go into a carrier store and every screen size costs the same, if not some of the big screen phones cheaper. Like I think the Nokia Lumia 920 is $100. And that's got a giant display. And some of the Android phones are cheaper, or at least the same price, giant displays. But you also have something of the quality of an iPhone 4, an iPhone 4S, eventually an iPhone 5 with a big 0 sticker on it. That's a pain in your average selling price.
Right.
And that hits them back in Wall Street, where they've been having all sorts of fun in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Oh yeah, the stock. The whole stock price. Worrying about where the stock price is going. I can't get I can't argue
Isn't it
about. I
ridiculous?
can't even
I
get
mean, there were rumors about Apple televisions, and it affected the stocks of other television companies.
Well, see that I understand. that wouldn't, if Apple does, and when they do introduce a TV, which also seems to be clearly in the works, and not just like completely smoke and mirrors.
So I mean, you have Touch Arcade, you have your finger on the pulse of gaming. This kind of started off this latest round of rumors with one of the guys who were on the original Xbox team saying that he thought if Apple, unleashed the SDK for the Apple TV and opened it up to gaming, it could destroy modern consoles. And then MG Siegler said, he's hearing stuff about that for the fall.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Jobs even said this at one point, saying that obviously they could do apps on the Apple TV, and it's just something they'll sort of when the time is right. The Apple TV is still a bit of a mystery to me in terms of what I'm excited about. If I was personally excited about, of course I'm sure I'd get an Apple TV, but an Apple like a full Apple television. But that's a low bar really for me in Apple products. But the Apple television experience, the promise, whatever the killer app is a little unclear to me. I mean, right now I sort of feel like I'm doing what I want to. I'm piecing together the Apple television, like the ideal internet television experience, which is what shows I want to watch. So but I kind of have it spread over Netflix, over Apple TV, over my file, my DVR, which I record whatever shows I actually am interested in. And so some things slip the cracks, and I can kind of jump to another thing. But but the experience isn't. So if you told me, the Apple television set is going to do all that for you all in one interface, I mean that'd be great. But it's not going to change my world as much as the iPhone did, for example, compared to my previous smartphone.
Well, here's the weird thing. I mean, people said the idea of making a panel, if there's an Apple panel, and to be clear, I've heard that that's not moving forward, the actual Apple panel display. But the idea of doing that is that Apple controls input 0. So the minute you turn on that television, it's not Samsung or Sony or anybody else giving you that initial experience. It's Apple. And then presumably you could search and do everything across, everything would be controlled by Apple. But they don't even do that now on the Apple TV they control. I can't go into one search thing, search Netflix and iTunes and Hulu and Wall Street Journal and sports. I have to go into every individual app and search. There's not even a unified Apple experience on the box they do control.
Right. Well, I mean, I think making an Apple television set is, I guess one of the arguments for it would be, you don't have to install a box to your TV. But I don't know, the whole TV set, setup and home theater systems are so complicated that it's hard. I guess the goal would be the Apple television would be it. I mean, maybe you'd have a cable box, I guess.
I'm not lining up every year to buy a television, Arn.
No, and that's the beauty of the mobile market is every 2 years people upgrade.
Yeah.
So suddenly you don't need to keep bringing in new customers. You just kind of keep up with the old ones at the very minimum.
Because Steve Jobs supposedly in that book, right, in the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson, it said that he cracked the television, but it's just supposition what he meant by that.
Right. People kind of tried to, interpret. Presumably that means that he figured out the best way to get it to market or get it, get the interface or whatnot. I think the best comment about Jobs made about when people asked about doing a set-top box type situation was that the issue was that there's no national carrier, and you can't getting it to market is the biggest pain.
It was the All Things D conference, I think.
Yeah, and of course, Apple says stuff all the time, and then they turn around and introduce an iPhone. But I think that is a real problem. So I think it seems clear to me that Apple. I always assume that Apple has a plan now. I guess that's my takeaway from Steve Jobs' quote in terms of he cracked it. So they have a plan. They know how they want to do a TV, but then the main holdup is getting content providers, getting it, making it work. Making it having all the content that people actually would want. Because if you just have a nice interface but no content, no one's gonna.
If it's a Thunderbolt display you put on the wall, then that's not the television people are looking for.
Right. Right.
And it's interesting because right now they have a channel partnership strategy, the same thing as Siri. So instead of opening up APIs, they go to a certain company, they make a specific deal, whether it's movie tickets or Open Table on Siri, or whether it's the Wall Street Journal app or the Netflix app or the YouTube app on the Apple TV, and they sign an agreement and they put an icon on the screen, and it's not open, it's end-to-end controlled. But opening up an SDK and an API, that destroys any partnership value for them, because now anybody can just make an app and push stuff to the TV.
Right. And I think that was the argument for how it would be huge for indie developers, is that you could, they would basically make the app store for the Apple TV. And I don't think you can say that since they haven't done it that they're not going to do it. I do feel like if they want to do it, they're going to wait until they do it right. They do it with, they may wait for the Apple television set rather than like add features to the Apple TV and sort of steal, do it all at once and do it right. The gaming stuff is sort of interesting to talk about, though, in that I don't know. Apple. I guess the presumption is Apple would introduce a controller for this television, or make a standalone gaming. I guess it depends on. I guess it's a whole different type of gaming. There's been a lot of people who said, "Oh, people, you can have your iPhone and you can control your game." But I feel like pairing a $600, or $300 device with your Apple television will make your market too small.
It'd be like that Wii U thing that you're trying to.
At least the Wii U comes with the Wii, or the Wii U controller comes with the Wii U. This is you're buying a television and then if you happen to have an iPhone, I feel like they'd need to do something dedicated to if they really wanted to destroy the game market, which I don't think they do. Apple has never been that interested in the game market.
They've never really got, as much as we say they don't get services, they don't get social, and John Carmack has ranted about this many times. They don't seem to. It's almost like they fell accidentally into huge gaming success with the iPod Touch and the iPhone and now the iPad. But it's not a deep DNA thing in the company.
Oh, definitely. And I think if you go back, I followed Apple for years, even well before, even before Steve Jobs, I guess right around when Steve Jobs left the first time. But I remember quotes from Jobs. Jobs did not like games. It was not. And so he thought games were, whatever. I don't want to misquote him, I guess.
But he didn't like games.
No, but he didn't. Certainly with if he had his way, the Mac would never have gotten color. It was those sort of things, and of course that was a long time ago, and obviously I'm sure he's changed. Before he passed, he changed at least tune. But my takeaway from all that was that Apple and Jobs, and therefore Apple, probably never really thought games were an important.
What do you think of MG's distinction between the hardcore gaming that dominates consoles and the idea of the casual game that could obliterate it? The Wii's kind of started that. The iOS has kind of started that. But is there a massive mainstream casual gaming audience that would make consoles into a tiny little segment of a dying breed?
The console question is interesting. So there's a few things there. So the casual mainstream audience, I think that was the basis of the Wii's success, right? That was the introducing the game to people who don't normally buy game consoles. Right. My parents have a Wii. They do not have any. They don't have an Xbox.
Do they use it? Because that was the charge on the Wii. Is that you buy it and you stick it on the shelf and you never use it.
They used it a little early on, but it's still it still entered that market that did not. It
was a sale, but not an attraction. They didn't get continued business from it.
They got enough business though, and they, I think it opened the eyes to, it opened everyone's eyes in that, because normally. You look at the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and it was HD and hardcore and everything. And then the Wii, the original Wii was not HD, as I recall. It was whatever. It wasn't very high end. So it was basically like the GameCube or
exactly.
Whatever hardware. So it wasn't an impressive, and yet they had an interesting interface and they did really well. Again, growing the market. And I do think that the casual gaming market is massive, and obviously Facebook games.
There was no barrier to entry. You picked up that little controller, and if you could play golf, you could play golf. If you could, played baseball, you could play baseball.
Yeah. So no, that's definitely the big market. Again, and so so depending on where you think that the I think the casual gaming market is definitely more massive than the hardcore gaming market. I mean, that being said, the hardcore gaming market is still a huge market. I mean, you always see comparisons about like it does more business than the movie market.
We're about to see the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Infinity or whatever, if the rumors are to be believed.
Yeah. So here, a related note, did you ever get Real Racing 3?
No, they keep saying it was available in Canada, and I just could not get it to show up.
It wasn't true, apparently. So,
but
Real Racing
Fireman saying that too. I mean, I from the source.
Oh yeah. So I guess they didn't, or whatever. They checked the wrong box.
It was like a bazinga at the end of that statement.
But so Real Racing 3. So if people aren't familiar, Real Racing 3 is like the sequel to the popular Real Racing series, but this time it's free to play. So you download for free, and they charge you for like gold coins that you use to speed up timers that end up slowing you down. If you have to repair your car, so you have to wait like 3 minutes before your car is ready, and so you can use it again. And you can, of course, skip that queue if you use these gold coins that you either earn at a slow rate or you can buy them over through the App Store. So I mean, that's a good example of they are so Real Racing. And it's generated a lot of controversy because there are hardcore gamers who were like looking forward to Real Racing 3 as like the ultimate iPhone game, racing game, and now they're like pissed because it's turned into this sort of timer-based social, trying to get a broader audience. But I mean, that is EA/Fire Monkeys, I guess now, aiming for that large, massive, casual market.
That's how they make money on the App Store now, right? If you look at the top 10 grossing, it's no longer the iWorks apps; it's these apps that are free plus tons of in-app purchase.
Right, and so that's what they're aiming at, and you can't blame them too much.
We told them that, Arn. We said we will not pay $1 for a game, but we will pay $99 to have a better looking Smurflet than the guy next to us.
Well, it's not even like everyone. It's just like the small 5% or whatever that pay for those, and they subsidize, it for everyone else, essentially.
People with more money than patience.
Right, and I don't necessarily. I was playing. I've been playing Real Racing 3, and I was like flipping through. And I haven't paid $1 yet I've not paid anything for it, but I did flip through like the high end cars. You can get like a Bugatti for like for like 1 million gold coins. I looked up how much it would cost to like actually convert it. So it was like, you could probably for like $70. I could get a Bugatti like right now, and I was tempted for a minute. I was like, that would be cool, I mean, I didn't do it. I just felt more mostly because I couldn't admit to it. But no, it was I could see it happening. I mean, I'm not gonna grind through. I'm not gonna get the Bugatti in the game. I'll tell you that.
There's no way you're gonna grind.
I'm not gonna make it. I'm kind of already growing tired. I'm not that good at racing game guy, but it does a really good holding your hand through the early parts of it. But yeah, I can tell you, I'm never going to actually earn that car. So I can see the temptation. Maybe like if I play it enough, I'll be like, I'm just going to buy it.
And then all your friends see you flying by in the Bugatti, and suddenly they want the Aventador or they want the Lotus, and then they're buying $70, and Fire Monkeys are retiring.
Yeah, well, so probably yeah. I think they'll do. I think they're going to make more money doing it this way.
Absolutely.
But it's definitely. I think maybe at the sacrifice of the hardcore gamers. I think the casual.
I forget if it was Eli on Touch Arcade, but someone wrote an article saying that you're complaining now about free to play when you're the ones that weren't supporting games when they were just buy and play. Yeah,
it's a hard argument to make because obviously the internet, you're arguing against the internet. So,
the internet is wrong.
There's some people who didn't want to buy, some people were happy to buy, and then so it's like it's hard to there needs to be some sort of like. You need to be able to tag people somehow and then like
hold them accountable later.
Right. You can't just because otherwise there's not as much satisfaction in telling people.
So could you see a world where there's like a halfway thing where Apple maybe opens up an SDK and an API, but only in certain segments, like only for games and only for entertainment, so that you can get stuff like Crackle or you could get stuff like Real Racing 3, but there maybe won't be productivity apps or utilities?
I mean, they already do that with the App Store rules. I mean, there are certain classes of applications they don't allow, and so it wouldn't, it doesn't seem like it would be that big a stretch for them to have a whole separate set of rules for Apple TV SDK, saying we only want like video apps or whatever, and not like don't try to port Office to the Apple TV.
We don't want to. Well, it's interesting now because there's a lot of people say the SDK is AirPlay. You build whatever you want on your iPhone or your iPad, and then you.
Yeah. How many people do that?
But also, like, there's not a lot of apps that I actually like. I've played letterpress on my Apple TV, and I kind of wish that people would make a unique interface for the television that when you beam it, it would take on 16 by 9 and it would adjust itself for 10-foot experience. But there's latency issues with gaming,
Yeah.
and there's also what kind of apps do you really need on your television as opposed to just a tablet in front of you?
Right. And then as a developer, you're developing for the intersection of people who A, have an iPhone,
Yeah.
B, have an Apple TV, the latest generations of Apple TV, because I have the old Apple TV and it doesn't do support AirPlay. So that plus people who are actually willing to like broadcast their app onto their Apple TV screen. I mean, you know, it's such a small intersection of people that there's no reason for anyone to do it now. And then that's why I feel like if Apple does do an Apple SDK for an Apple television, it has to be independent of people owning an iPhone, because your market's already going to be small and growing anyway. You don't want to suddenly chop it in like whatever, a fifth or a third.
Is natural language a good enough interface? So if they make an Apple TV 4 and it's got Siri built in and it's got a camera, so you can not only do FaceTime, but you can do stuff like Leap or Connect, could they put everything into being able to talk and or air gesture? Or do you need that physical controller like a PlayStation or like an Xbox?
If you want to do games, I think you need a physical controller of some kind. If you're just talking about like interface, I think voice could be great. I mean, I will say when reading about that, you know, if I turn on my television and try to find a channel, that is the hardest thing ever. I usually just end up flipping through page after page of channel trying to like identify the channel, because you know, I have like 100, 200 channels.
I was at my mom's today and every channel said data not available, so I had no idea what anything was and what the description was.
Yeah, so it's impossible. I mean, you know, so like I guess at one point someone's like, "Oh, something's on CNN." So I'm like, I don't know what channel CNN's on. So if I could just say, "TV, turn channel to CNN," and it does it, then that would be amazing.
And Xbox does. I mean, you can talk to the latest generation Xbox and you can wave at Connect, but it's not seamless yet. It's still like, stop.
Yeah, Xbox voice stuff is impressive, and the gesture stuff, it's just not. It's just hard. I don't know. It's just for some reason I don't. It's not like in the forefront. You know, you don't think about it. I mean, it's basically an add-on to a game console, so it's not like your primary thing. But the demos and the what I've tested with it, it's pretty impressive. It's been really impressive.
One thing I can't figure out yet is, let's say Apple does go ahead with an Apple TV 4 or whatever they call it. Is that a hobby? Is there any universe where that transcends from being a hobby to being a leg of their business, the way the iPhone is, the way the iPad is, where instead of selling single-digit millions, it's selling high tens of millions, approaching hundreds of millions?
Well, I think that is if and when Apple jumps from making the box to the television, maybe, or maybe they'll do both. Maybe they'll develop the box and the television. I think the problem with the box, the Apple TV, little box, is this. What Jobs was saying. It's convincing someone to buy a box.
It's one more box,
and then plug it into their television
after their cable box, after their Xbox, maybe after their DVR.
Now, hardcore Apple fans, hardcore like home TV people would be, they're willing to do it, and they understand how to plug they understand how to set up a VCR. But, for like the masses, I think buying a box to play the content from your, it's just not I guess there's two things. First of all, it's a pain to do. And then second, the content right now isn't reflective. It's not like you can play your iTunes content on it, which is nice and handy, but it's not like a killer app, I would say, at this point. So Apple needs to make it a killer app, which means they need to do whatever magic they do, whatever Steve Jobs cracked. And then the second thing is, I think making it a purchasable television probably does open it up a little more to at least the mass market if you're going to buy a television. But there's a lot of, I'm not saying that like, I think it's definitely, there's no like hurdles to that, because like you said, you don't buy a TV every, I don't know when the next time I'm going to upgrade my television is. And then,
well, I keep going back to that Guy English article where he said that, you can keep the box and the TV, and if you want the TV, you can buy it, but then instead of upgrading it, you just buy the next box. And if you don't want the Apple TV, you can just buy the box.
Right. There's an argument to be made. Why do I need a television? Then I can just have a television. But then again, Apple's also the one that makes an iMac and a Mac Mini, which are all integrated. Or I guess the Mac Mini is not, but the iMac's all integrated. So,
which is actually interesting, because there was a couple other things that happened this week that I thought was interesting. One was the Staples thing, And I think Mark Arnold
Okay.
might still be in the chat room, and he did a lot of work on that, and you guys had it up as well. But it looks like Apple for a while, like they built the Apple Store and they built Apple.com, and they made Apple the destination where you'd go to get their stuff. And now with the Flipboard deal, with the Walmart deal, both digitally and in terms of brick and mortar, they're going out more. They're trying to go to where their customers are. And that seems like a much more mainstream, like they're still a premium brand, but they're being much more, whatever the opposite of approachable is. They're doing the work. They're going out and proselytizing Apple now.
Right. And I mean, it's an interesting way to go, because I guess for a while Apple depended on, that's why Apple did retail, right? Because they wanted to have their products shown in a good light in places that other stores wouldn't carry them.
Yeah.
I mean, I just see it as more, it's just sort of like, Apple wants to grow, right? So, in order to grow, they have to grow either, they have to grow presence, they have to grow retail presence. I mean, these are all things that factor in. It's once you get the size of Apple, you want to keep growing, and in order to do that, you have to increase your retail presence and do this sort of things and make them accessible. Yeah. And then, then the other thing is whether or not they have to introduce a cheaper iPhone or not, and that sounds like
they lowered the price of the MacBooks this week.
Yeah, that was interesting. I thought that was somewhat surprising. I kind of made me think about. Do you remember when Apple introduced the 128 gig iPad just a month ago or whatever? And then people were like, "Oh, well, clearly that means they're not going to introduce a new iPad until the fall." So it kind of made me think of that, where it's like, well, they tweaked the MacBook Pro, so we're not going to expect a new MacBook Pro update until late this year. And then the other thing is, I guess it may be because they dropped. So what they did is they dropped the prices on the Retina MacBook Pros, right? And the talk is, or the rumor, and there was an analyst that has a good track record. I don't know how to say his name. Kuo.
Yeah, Kuo.
Ko. Yeah, he said for a while now that they're going to consolidate the line in Q3 of this year. So there will only be a MacBook Retina. There will not be a MacBook Pro non-Retina anymore, which makes sense. But I think the prices are starting to converge. And so, maybe that's a step in that direction, where in the fall, when they introduce, they'll say, "Oh, we're eliminating two lines, this one, and the price will be maybe somewhere in between."
Yeah, well, they need to. I mean, like they keep the other ones around because the price was so high. The price of one thing Apple's really conscious about is the initial price of entry, the one that they can put up and say starting at. And they always want to make sure like they have a $1,000 laptop, for example, to start at.
Yeah.
And if they get rid of the MacBook Pros before they have a good starting price on the Retina ones, then they seem to have a marketing problem.
Yeah. No, and so I think that maybe this is a step in that direction to combine the lines.
And it's interesting because they have like the 13-inch regular, 15-inch regular, 13-inch Retina, 15-inch Retina, but the people are still waiting on that Air, like the mythical Retina Air. Or the big Air updates. And it just seems like the amount of battery you can put into an Air and the amount of pixels. I have the 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro when it first came out, not the new version, but the original one. And that GPU was on redline trying to move those pixels. And that's what I'm waiting for in that line, is a better Intel integrated processor to just handle the raw pixel count at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same Retina MacBook Pro, and I've been happy with it. I mean, I don't play games on it, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, but I guess you're right. Even scrolling and stuff, sometimes people...
Mission Control takes a while.
Yeah, I don't use Mission Control, but yeah. But no, it sounds like the Airs will probably take. It probably might be another year before the Airs go Retina. I mean, probably not this year. At least what the talk is. So, and the iMac 2 probably won't go Retina this year.
Well,
so
they have the problem with the iMac is that they need to have a panel with yield rates that are good enough at that size. And then if you want an external display, Thunderbolt's not big enough anymore. You'd need 2x Thunderbolt just to push that many pixels to a display.
Yeah, I would love a large screen monitor. I mean, I have a Mac Pro still, so I'm one of those guys. So I have a 30-inch, Apple's 30-inch from years ago. I mean, it's lasted a long time now, I guess. But I would love a Retina. But even now, after having the Retina MacBook Pro, the 30-inch Apple Cinema display, I can tell it's not Retina.
Yeah.
It bothers me.
People say it's further away, so I can't. But you can tell.
Nah, I can tell. I can still tell. Or I sit strangely close to my monitor.
I have the 27-inch Thunderbolt. Not Thunderbolt. I have the one before it because there's no Thunderbolt on the... I guess it works anyway. I guess because you have mini display as part of Thunderbolt, it would work regardless. But I have the 27-inch on my Mac Pro. Do you have a take on the Mac Pro? I mean, people said that Apple's abandoning power users, but Tim Cook said there may be something for power users.
Okay. Well, I mean, they are abandoning power users, right? I mean, is there any doubt? Is there any question about that? You were on a panel about that, weren't you?
Yeah,
I didn't catch the panel. What was your So what did you guys say? Did you guys say?
So yeah, it was
yes.
me, John Gruber, Lex Friedman was running it, Matthew Panzarino from the Next Web was on it, and Paul Kafessis from Rogue Amoeba. And my take it was a real cop out, but I still believe it, that Apple really doesn't care about power users. They never have. They only care about empowering users. So when you go from the Apple II to the Mac to the iPad, they shed what were previously considered to be power user features, but they create the ability for more people to do more powerful work at the same time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cop out, but yeah, I mean, this is Apple. Like, I think people complaining. I mean, it's not just Apple; it's Steve Jobs too. I mean, you look at Apple. Like, I mean, you look at the iPhone. And you look at the iPad especially. And I feel like the iPad, of course, is like the mass market computer. And I feel like it's sort of been the dream for Apple and or Steve Jobs over the years is, the computers are too complicated. And like if you go back to when the Mac and, so there was first the Apple II, Apple IIc, Apple IIgs, blah, blah, blah. And then Jobs jumped on the Mac project, or Lisa, and then the Mac project. And, the whole Windows interface was like this. It was as dramatically different an interface from going from DOS command line to Windows mouse control as going from Windows mouse to touch iPad was. I mean, it's that sort of like that was a big jump, and the dream I think has always been for Apple as a company has been trying to like bring it to the masses.
My father started at IBM when they had punch cards, Arn. When we got our first Apple II with a command line, I was like, you see, you kids have it easy these days.
Right. So the command line was like an amazing advancement from the punch card, but I guess So I mean, if like they're not interested in that market. I mean, both historically as like a culture, but also like from a money standpoint. The mass market is where they're shooting clearly is shooting for the mass market, which it was a move to laptops, I guess initially, and then now it's iPad, iOS, and
the Xserve.
The Xserve. I mean, they just don't care enough about that. I mean, it's just not their. It's not in their thinking. And there was a great article back when Final Cut Pro X came out. There's an article by someone who used to work at Apple, and I forget what his credentials were, but basically he had like this little rant that Apple doesn't care about the pro users anymore. They want Final Cut Pro X was to let more casual users use Final Cut Pro. So that's the same thing. Are they ignoring their
I can use
Final
Cut
users?
Pro now, Arn. That's how good it is.
Could you not before?
It was complicated for me before.
Yeah,
but Final Cut Pro, it's much easier now.
That's the sum of it. I mean, depending on which side of that pro line you fall on, you either love it or you hate it. Because if you're on the other side, then you're like, oh, they're ignoring us. Whereas if now you can use it, you're like, oh, this is amazing. But anyway, the Mac Pro. Go back to the Mac Pro, which we were talking about. I think the Mac Pro is coming. I mean, it's definitely going to be updated this year, right? So Apple said stuff about the Mac Pro last year. It was weird. It was very uncharacteristic of Apple. Why would Apple PR and Tim Cook both said basically the new Mac Pro is coming next year, right?
Yep.
We'll
have something for pro users next year, I think was the...
Well, I think Tim Cook said that, but then the Apple PR one was a little more specific because they were like the Mac Pro and iMac will be updated next year or something. And then they actually corrected like, oh, we didn't mean the iMac because the iMac was updated. It was going to be updated later last year. So it was but Apple doesn't have to say anything, and they don't ever say anything like that. So the fact that they said something makes me feel like it's gonna happen because otherwise, if they were just going to discontinue the Mac Pro and they didn't care about whatever, they would just be like, say nothing, and then people would just be left hanging.
The discussion we had on Mac Break was whether it'll be the Mac Pro as we understand it, or it'll be the next generation thing, because now you have Thunderbolt, and you could conceivably have all these things that used to be slots inside a giant machine.
No, that would piss people off.
Could it be rack mountable with a bunch of FireWire extension? I mean, what could they?
How could they? Why would they make it rack mountable? Right? I mean, do they care? If people want to rack mount it, I don't think so. I mean, I can't imagine.
Will it have optical drives?
Well, actually, I wouldn't care if it didn't. I mean, because you can easily add an optical drive if you really want one. I guess what I thought you were going with this was I thought you were going maybe like you were going to say that the new Mac Pro is going to be like a Mac Mini.
Well, I mean,
plus,
it could be, right? It could be an iMac or a Mac Mini plus whatever makes it a magical set of slots.
Right, like a external chassis or something.
Yeah.
And that
or modular.
That seems Apple, right? That seems like, oh look, here's the Mac Mini Pro. It looks like a Mac Mini, but it's got more RAM. It seems like that does seem like but again, I don't know if Apple,
RAID.
I don't know if Apple cares enough to do that. In terms of the Pro users, I think I don't know. My impression was that they were just going to make a incremental update to the Mac Pro and follow maybe use the latest Xeon processors.
Well, that's the thing, right? That a lot of the time the mystery about when Apple's going to release something is bound to when Qualcomm or Intel or whatever company they're sourcing the components have on their roadmap.
Right.
So I mean, they won't make a new Mac Pro until, and I guess they skipped a generation, but until whatever the next processor whatever the next server processor is from Intel.
Right, presumably, unless they change that decision, but I don't know if they will. But I guess I'm expecting an update, and I guess my impression is, why would they go to the trouble of making unless it actually looks exactly like a Mac Mini? So that would be like the worst case scenario. But why would they go through the trouble of making like a Mac Mini Pro that's a little different when like the market for that is so small?
Well, they have the Mac Mini server right now, which arguably replaced the X-Serve.
Yeah, that's true. Uh-oh.
Sort of the last thing I wanted to touch on was, and this is this thing that still stymies me, and there was a new article this week quoting the VP of marketing from Mophie about Apple's control over the Lightning chip market. And you were at CES this year, you were at Macworld, so you probably heard the same stories I did about the scarcity of Lightning chips. But this is a company that can put 100 million iPhones on the market in literally a blink of an eye. And yet for a month, we didn't have Lightning connectors at all, ever. For like, if you lost your cable for your iPhone, you couldn't charge the thing.
Yeah.
And now still accessory makers are saying they can't get, or they have to go through, like, they have to jump through hoops. Apple was very stingy on who they approved. Now they still get one master chip. It just sounds strange.
I mean, I don't know if it's that. I mean, well, is it strange, or is it that surprising, I guess, is the other question.
I don't know. I thought that they would have, if they were going to switch to a new kind of connector, I would have thought it would behoove them to make those connectors plentiful at time of launch and have accessory makers ramping up quickly.
Right. Well, certainly having enough Apple-branded connectors would have made sense. I mean, in fact, then that probably was a misstep, right? Because they didn't have enough cables, right, initially. So that is, and that's probably, I don't know whose fault that was. Probably Tim. I guess it's always Tim Cook's fault, right?
The buck stops there.
Yeah, but as for the third-party manufacturers, I don't know if it's that surprising. I mean, especially because just like cases and stuff, while it would be great for third-party manufacturers to be able to produce accessories on day one, they don't or can't because Apple is too secretive, right? I mean, isn't that that's the limiting factor in that whole scheme? It's possible. I mean, they could have, if it was a different company, they could have gotten together with Mophie a month before the iPhone 5 was released and said, "Oh, here are the specs. Here, start ramping up." But Apple won't do that. I mean, even with the case stuff, they won't. I mean, definitely with case stuff, they don't do that, and everything is sort of leak stuff. So I mean, that being said, they do seem to be especially tight with the Lightning connectors for whatever reason.
And the program apparently, like the NDA for the accessory people makes the NDA for the software look tame. I mean, it's really tightly controlled, and it sounded like at first there were only really big companies that were going to be permitted to fab this stuff, and now it still sounds like a pain, and that it's very controlled, and that maybe whatever the bootleg accessories coming out will be difficult to do.
Right. I mean, it goes back. I think Apple likes having control of the accessory market because it's such a huge market, and it's a bit. You can say it's a bit greedy. They did that with the dock connector for a long time too. So it's just that's just sort of
apparently stricter than the dock was originally.
Yeah. I mean, they probably yeah. I mean, I don't have any good things to say about it overall. I think Apple. I mean, I'm not going to defend Apple's. But I guess I understand it if I don't understand it makes sense
from Apple's point of view.
From Apple, right? Yeah.
Are you all Lightning now, Arn, or do you still have dock connectors?
I have a lot of iPads and I have kids, so the iPads get a lot of, even the the first generation iPad still gets a lot of use.
Is that what
so
you
I
do?
still
You
have
hand down?
like,
Because that's what I do whenever I
basically.
I hand the stuff down.
I mean, I can't use them all, so and they end up getting like used, and so I have like this docking wall of like all these dock connectors and like but I mean, my iPhone 5 is what I use the most, so I switched my main connectors to that.
Yeah, I do. I have only Lightning now because I gave away all the non. I think we actually have an iPad 2 and iPad 1 on the shelf that I use for pictures when I have to. But almost everything, I keep one of every body design just around for pictures and measurements and stuff, and everything else I pass along to family members because I hate the idea of them not being used.
Did you get the newest iPad?
I didn't get 128 yet. I did get the iPad 4 though.
Right, that's what I meant. The 4.
Yeah,
I meant the 4.
Yeah, I did.
I actually didn't get the 4 because I didn't.
It's no different. The only difference is that what the iPad 3 does on Redline, the iPad 4 feels like it does comfortably. It can't do more, but it feels like it's doing it more easily, almost like an iPad 2 did stuff.
Yeah, I do like the iPad Mini a lot. I definitely use the iPad Mini more than the full iPad. And I was one of the people that you hear how people experience the iPad differently. Yeah. So I have a sister-in-law who uses the iPad more than she uses her notebook now, which that you hear that story a lot. For me, the iPhone, I use my iPhone so much that like it was so, and my iPhone is so good in general that I feel like it's hard for me to because I always have my iPhone with me. So if I'm sitting on the couch and I have my iPhone, it's hard for me to justify getting up and looking for my iPad when I still have my iPhone. If I want to do something that I need to get up for, I go to my computer. So, but the iPad Mini sort of helped a lot. I do like it.
My sister is in town visiting, and works in health services, much as you used to, Arn. She's at a director level now, and they had a conference for people who do this kind of job, and it happened to be in Montreal. So they had a bunch of different regional directors there, and she said that almost all of them were using iPads now. Most of them had the Logitech keyboard with them, so they were all sitting there with their iPad using the Logitech keyboard. One person had a laptop that had incredible problems connecting to Wi-Fi and whose battery ran out all the time. So he ended up taking handwritten notes while they were all, laughing away on their and to them, that's a real computer for them now. They don't need. She has a MacBook Air. She didn't even bother to bring that. She just brought her iPad. Yeah,
the battery life is probably actually maybe one of the big factors there because it's like that's your MacBook's not going to last all day.
I use the Mini all the time now because I usually have a MacBook with me, but for anything but reading comic books, or sometimes if I don't have a laptop with me, I'll bring it because it's easier to do, grown-up work on a big screen.
Yeah. All
right, so what is new with MacRumors and Touch Arcade and App Shopper, Arn, before we let you go?
What's new? Let's see. Not much new. I mean, MacRumors is chugging along. And I've been working on trying to get some new features and stuff going on the site, but it's always slow going. Touch Arcades, covers iPhone games, and January's a slow month. Everyone releases all their games before Christmas, and then suddenly January rolls around, and it's until the Real Racing 3 thing happened, it was very slow. And App Shopper, I don't know if we want to talk about App Shopper. The app is just for like a brief. Our App Shopper app got pulled from the App Store because of new rules in the App Store, so we resubmitted a new version this week, and hopefully that'll get approved. Hopefully.
All right. So if people want to find out more about you, more about your websites, where can they go, Arn?
You can go to, I guess, MacRumors.com is the main one. That's a big one. So that's probably where most people are familiar with. I'm on Twitter at Arnold Kim, no space, and that's probably if you want to follow me directly.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Arnold. I always have a great time talking to you.
Thank you.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. For all of our shows, you can go to mobilenations.com/shows. I want to thank you, especially to our fantastic chat room, for joining us live. We are live almost every Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't already, join us, ask your questions, contribute to the chat room, and as Steve Strezza says, high fives all around.